In early 2025, our Sunrise Rotary Chapter invited Allan Dupuis, a psychiatric nurse, to speak before our chapter on how mental health has evolved. And he also discussed the Seafarers Ministry sponsored by local churches and organizations, including our local St. Benedict's Episcopal Church. Many of those working on the cargo and passenger ships have need for companionship, counseling, and other services and assistance. And this would be a great project for other Rotary chapters.
What's it called?
This is our speaker, Allan Dupuis, and he's going to be talking to us about mental health. Allan is a psychiatric nurse.
Thank you, Bruce, for inviting me, and I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to share the issues that are prevalent in our world today. I'd like to start out, as I do most of my gatherings and meetings, I'd like you all to take a great big deep breath in, and while you do that, I want you to inhale all of the love that is in the universe, and particularly in this room. You folks represent an incredible amount of love, a love of community, a love of people, a love of people in need. So that's something to celebrate. So inhale love, because the universe is filled with it, and it's absolutely free for the taking. And as you exhale, I ask you to exhale gratitude. And exhale in gratitude for the many blessings that are abundant and present to us, through us each and every day. And I live a life that is based on sayings, and one of those sayings is, a grateful heart will never feel bad, drink, drug, hurt somebody. So you fill in the blank, but if you keep that in mind, that a grateful heart does great, powerful things, and there's always love in the universe for you to inhale. So we've already did an invocation. That's the other thing I always do, is invite our, I call it higher power or supreme being, so that it's universal and inclusive. But that presence is in us, working through us, and we forget. So I ask my source to be present here. I titled the presentation tonight, Beyond the Stigma, because there's still an amazing amount of stigma in our world about mental illness, about addiction, and in recent years we might have taken a few steps back, unfortunately. As Bruce said, I am a psychiatric nurse by training. I have been an active member of the healthcare community since 1974. I started grassroots. Actually, I started before that as a volunteer in a candy striper back in the day. But my first full-time job in healthcare was back in 1974. I was an orderly. And worked my way, ended up going to nursing school after deciding that medical school was not for me, but kudos to you. And I got out of nursing school, and the universe decided to drop kick me right into the field of mental health. So I've been an active member of the mental health practicing community since 1983. And for the better part of that, I functioned as a psychiatric nurse administrator, running psychiatric programs. The latest one that I was involved with was the Woodmont Mental Health Center right up the street in Tamarack. I retired from full-time direct leadership 2 years ago, but I'm still very much active. I am now an adjunct faculty member at Broward Community College, as well as Nova in their nursing program, where I do clinical nursing for psychiatric mental health. And for me, as I get to the end of that road, it's my last hurrah. It's an opportunity to kind of share and give forward 40 plus years of experience that you can't learn in a textbook. And for me, it's symbolic of turning over the reins of my involvement to the next generation and hoping that they'll carry the torch forward. So in our time together this evening, I hope that you'll gain an awareness of how extensive mental illness is in our community, that you'll understand the increased prevalence of it and why we're seeing more of it, particularly today, more so than we've ever seen at any time in our lifetimes. I think I'm hoping that you will also become aware of the increased incidence of mental illness and the associated problems in our elderly community. Hopefully be able to give you some tips on how to recognize and how to appropriately address someone who is having a mental health crisis or is struggling with mental health. To start out with, I find it fascinating that at any given time in our world and in our community, 25% of the population is dealing with an active mental health diagnosis. And by that, a major diagnosis, I mean somebody dealing with schizophrenia, major depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. 1 in 4 people at any given time. I will claim my seat. I have been a consumer, and I daily have to manage my behavioral health condition. So there's 2 of us right here out of 6, so we're a little bit ahead of the curve. In addition, there are 30% or 1 in 3 that are dealing with an active issue of addiction. So if you put that together and you contemplate the next time you're on I-95 and we're all running bumper to bumper, side by side, doing 70 in that 655 zone, bear in mind that at least one of those people is dealing with an active mental health issue, and another 1 to 2 is dealing with an addiction issue, and a lot of them are dealing with them both at the same time. It gives you a whole new appreciation of how you are going to respond to road rage. Prevalence in our society, a lot of it is probably related to better recognition and a little bit of decrease in the stigma, so more people are getting treatment. But in the last 5 years, we've seen a dramatic increase of what I'll call aberrant behavioral health behavior in our community. And namely, we have seen a dramatic increase in the amount of violence in our society. For the last 25 years, a significant amount of research in the behavioral health arena has been focused on the impact of trauma. When you look at that, it has radically changed the delivery of mental health services in our country and across the world. Mental health services, as we know it, is a product of our lifetime. A little bit of history: prior to the 1940s, behavioral health care was largely institutional in asylums that were on the far outreaches of society because we didn't want people to see that we had mentally ill people in our midst. Why? Because a lot of it was felt to be based in spirituality, and it was felt to be a curse from God for something that your family had done in generations past. So there was a lot of shame and blame. So we hid them, besides the fact that we didn't have any treatment. So historically, there's a period in history where, in our own country, where lobotomies were the treatment of the day, and many famous people had lobotomies. The most recent famous person being one of the Kennedy children, who was lobotomized in the, I believe, early 40s, and again was then hidden away, and it was very, very sad. So again, we've gone from that. Thankfully, pharmacology came along, medications were approved, we started having hope for treating. I chuckle because most of the medications that we treat mentally ill people were invented after I was born. The only one that predates me is Thorazine. Everything else has come along since my birth in the late 50s. So thanks to pharmacology, thanks to pharmacy, thanks to medical taking a broader look at this. But most recently, and in that, there was still institutionalization in hospitals. The focus on treatment for probably 50 years was on control. We need to control the behavior, we need to control the person. So we take away all the maladaptive coping skills that they have and devices, but we didn't replace it with anything. And it became a power struggle. And the movie in the 1980s, Cuckoo's Nest, was pretty true to life. That's what mental health care was like for a long time. But coming to the current age and realizing that trauma is involved, trauma is a significant factor in the lives of individuals with mental illness. And prior to our dealing with COVID-19, it was estimated that 51% of society was operating from what we call trauma core. Certainly among the mentally ill at that time, we said that 90% of our persons served were coming from a place of trauma core. And a lot of research was done by reputable agencies and councils, and definitions were established of what is trauma. There was a large study done involving thousands of people, and it involved a survey of adverse childhood events. They looked at a huge number of people and looked at the events in their childhood that would be considered traumatic and how that has played out in their adult life. So it covered a span of almost 50 years. And they found that the higher the adverse childhood events score was, the more likely the person was to have pervasive mental health issues, addiction issues, which then fed into having more concomitant medical issues, because if you're dealing with mental health and you're self-medicating with drugs and alcohol and tobacco and all that, you have a lot of medical sequelae. It, of course, increased the cost of healthcare for individuals in our country and loss of productivity. The startling thing is most people that have trauma core don't live beyond age 65. As this was being implemented in the last 25 years of my career, it was a joy to see our treatment models changing from one of control to one of providing comfort. And I'll ask you to hang on to that word comfort, because it will come on to play. What happens when an individual is operating from trauma core is that the brain is operating faster. So it's almost like your car with extra octane. It's going to idle at 3,000 instead of 1,500. And your brain is idling faster. So if you put your car in gear at a high idling, it's going to jolt forward and screech, and it's going to scare you. Well, the same thing is going on in our brains, that we're revving higher. So there's an impulse, a stimulus that triggers us, and we go from that response of being, I'm going to yell at you, or I'm going to, throw a hissy, to I'm going to get out my AK-47 and my AR-15 and I'm going to mow you all down. Or I'm going to be on the highway and I have an episode, and instead of flipping you off or screeching out an obscenity, I'm going to run you off the road. The increased violence in our society is related to the number of people who are operating from trauma core. And if you take a look at our youth today, and I'm very grateful that you folks are being involved in things to access youth, because the youth in our society continue to be a grossly underserved and poorly served population. And if you look at the number of kids who today engage in violent acts that have mass casualty, it is astounding. And a lot of it is due to the trauma that our kids are perpetually being subjected to. Not only the individual trauma of physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect in the homes, but the impact that bullying has in our teenage community. If we roll the tape back 50 years ago, when Bruce and I were in high school, bullying was there, but you were bullied in your school. So maybe there was 200 kids in your small town high school. And it was awful to deal with, but now fast forward 50 years later, and kids are being bullied in their schools, but then it's broadcast on the internet. And it's put on Instagram, and it's put on Facebook, and it's put on YouTube. And now the whole world knows, and that shame and humiliation is tragic. And it leads the kid to develop that trauma core, and then when the kid is triggered, act out violently in large ways. So it's horrifying when you see a 13-year-old who brought a gun to school. It's horrible when they use it and there's mass casualties. It's just horrible. So that trauma core is also guiding how we respond. In a conversation that I had with an esteemed colleague who at one time served as the national medical director for one of the for-profit corporations, he had said to me, coming out of COVID, we were at a site together doing a site visit, and we were both champions of trauma-informed care. And he said, Alan, it's pretty sad today. And I said, what do you mean, Doc? He says, you do realize that now that we're on the other side of COVID, we are now a 100% traumatized society. COVID had a horrible impact on our population and on American society. And we are recovering from it economically and socially, but emotionally, we have not begun to heal. And from that, we're seeing an increase again in the amount of violence in our society, in the amount of turbulence, in the amount of discontent. So we still have an awful lot of work to do. The need is great, and the resources are dwindling. Unfortunately, here in South Florida, we are experiencing a dramatic decrease in the number of available acute care programs for our mentally ill, suffering population. A lot of the for-profit companies are getting out of the behavioral health care industry. So HCA has dramatically reduced their footprint. Tenant has eliminated their footprint. Other private companies have closed up shop. The district, Broward Health System, Memorial, and a couple of private hospitals still left. But the need is exponential. When we talk about our population, when we talk about the mentally ill, once the mentally ill person is engaged in a program or connected to a program, they are identified as vulnerable by state statute. The state statute also identifies that anybody over the age of 65 is vulnerable, regardless of their mental capacity. So when we're talking about the elderly in the broad scope, they are at risk, number one, because they are an identified vulnerable population. And again, in our community and in the normal aging processes that we go through as we age, there's an increased incidence or opportunity for depression. There's an increase in the level of isolation that aged people experience by virtue of physical infirmities that limit their access to other activities that they were normally engaged in. The loss of significant other, the loss of spouse, the loss of partner creates isolation. The loss of family members, the decrease in their functioning within the family unit. As the parent, you're actually involved and you're raising your children. Then they leave the nest. Then they have children and you're involved again. Well, as the grandchildren grow older, the grandparents have less significance in the life. There's less contact, so it leads to more isolation. That encourages the already aging process of cognitive decline. So as we age, unless we keep the mind going, and there's a lot of focus right now on using these games and using internet and apps appropriately and effectively, can be very effective for our aging population to keep the brain going. But if they don't do that and there's no social stimulation, there's no physical stimulation, they're isolated alone in their homes, cognitive decline can set in rapidly. And that's where care of self, taking care of activities of daily living like paying the rent, paying the bills, paying the condo fees, getting food, set in. And it can be a long time before somebody notices. And when somebody notices, it's usually not in a positive way. You haven't paid your bills, we're shutting off your lights. You haven't paid your condo fee, we're going to evict you. There's not that recognition of we need to do something to take care of this person. As a society, we have not been very favorably responsive to the plight of our aging population. And when you look at the statistics for mental health, and I'll give you some more numbers, suicide is a huge issue in our society. It's the 10th leading cause of death in adults. It's pretty wild for a civilized, advanced nation such as ours that it's the number 10 killer among adults. In adolescents, it's number 3. How can a country as great as the United States have suicide be the 3rd leading cause of death of our adolescents? I would ask you to consider that we're a society that does not like to deal with suicide, so we don't like to list it as a cause of death. And having worked in emergency services and dealt with individuals who are providers in emergency services, it's horrible to tell a family member that their loved one has killed themselves. It's much easier to say it was an accident. And that's what gets put on the death certificate. Death by accident. So accidents is the number 2 killer of our adolescents. and it's, I believe, number 7 or 8 for adults. But if you take 10% of the accidents and claim them as what they truly are, suicide becomes the second leading cause of death of our kids, and the 8th or 9th for adults. So it needs to be talked about. It needs to be recognized. And again, more and more we've made strides, because every time today you go to a healthcare provider, whether it's your podiatrist or your dentist, you are asked, have you had any feelings of hurting yourself or other people? That's a step in the right direction. A lot of times we're challenged. When we see somebody who's in crisis, we want to cross the street and go to the other side. We don't want to stand in the line in the grocery store where that person is having an event, because we don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to do the wrong thing. We don't want to get involved. Please, please, please. Let go of the fear. Let go of the, I don't know what to do. Tap into your divine given gift of compassion and empathy, and simply approach and ask, what's happening? What's going on? Not what's wrong. If you go up to a person and you say, what's wrong, it implies that there's some blame there on their part and that they're going to be in trouble. But if you ask somebody, what's happening? How do you feel today? And again, as a society, we don't respond well to that. Most of the times when somebody says, how are you? Good. Fine. None of those, ladies and gentlemen, are feelings. They are quick ways to get rid of you. And you know what? It works very well, because we want to be getting rid of. Nothing startles a person more when they ask, how are you? And you respond truthfully with, I don't feel good today. I'm sad. What do I do now? What do I say?
Pick up your pace.
Right. Oh, good luck. And sometimes we don't even pay attention. Oh, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Good luck. Have a nice day. And it truly is sad. If we as a society became more genuine in our interactions with each other of how do you feel today? I feel cheerful. I feel grateful. And if I don't feel that way, getting a response of, what can I do? What can I do right here, right now, with whatever situation is going on to make you feel more comfortable? That shift from control, of wanting to control the event and the behavior, to focusing in on what we need to make that distressed individual comfortable and processing it, is the key. And we've started doing that in mental health treatment, and it has amazing success. In the last 30 years in our country, by decree of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Studies, through the Agency for Healthcare Administration and the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Facilities, we have reduced and virtually eliminated the use of mechanical restraints in our acute care environment for behavioral health. And I'll tell you, in the 80s, that was an everyday event. And it was the only way we could control the event. But we've gotten wiser and better. We no longer use mechanical restraints. There are times where we have to use restraint, but it's physical. Human hands on human. Dramatic difference in how that feels to the individual. It feels, in some degree, comforting as opposed to controlling and restricting. So we have to be genuine. But in those situations in our community, when we're dealing with people who are struggling, what can I do to make you more comfortable? If somebody comes to your house, knocks on your door, and you open the door and you invite somebody you know, or somebody that is okay, you invite them in. What do you do next? Make them comfortable. Have a seat. Can I get you some coffee? I just bought a coffee cake. You want a slice? We focus on making the person comfortable. You do the same thing with the person in crisis. What can I do to make you comfortable? Come sit. When we're sitting, and I love the fact that we're sitting here because it doesn't feel like I'm towering down and talking down to you. And in healthcare, we're doing more and more of the sit and speak. What's going on? Tell me about you. Make the personal connection. Only been here for half an hour, but yet we have made personal connections, and I know a little bit about every one of you, and you know a little bit about me. So if you're into crisis, I can go and say, What can I do to make you more comfortable so that we can work at getting you even more better so that you can go out and enjoy the garden? And we can go out and look at the butterflies together. That's how we deal with individuals in our midst who are in crisis. Be open, ask open-ended questions. If you weren't here tonight, what would you be doing? That gives me an idea of what other things you do for fun after a day's work. The thing we need to do in all of our interactions with all of our fellow travelers on the road of life is to avoid saying and delivering messages that would initiate feelings of shame and humiliation. Because to the individual with trauma core, those feelings are so unbelievably intolerable that they will do anything to escape them, including hurting themselves or hurting other people. So a lot of times that kid who's shamed and humiliated is going to take them all out with them, and they know they're going to die in the process. It's such a horrifying experience. So in all of our interactions with each other, consistent with your 4-way test, say things that are not shaming and humiliating or blaming. If you see something, we hear this all the time in the airports. If you see something, say something. If you're out in an event, if you see something, if you are anywhere in the world and you're seeing somebody in struggle, if you don't feel comfortable approaching, find somebody who is. Find somebody. If you're out in the community at an event, find a law enforcement officer and say, I think this person is in crisis and I don't feel capable. I don't feel comfortable doing it, but somebody needs to help. Get that person connected. Within our communities, Florida is not one of the best providers of wraparound services for our mentally ill, our aging, or our addicted community. We rank, I believe, 49th. It is what it is. But I will say that organizations in the private sector are a lifeline to the individuals suffering. And to that end, you are already acquainted with NAMI. The chapter in Broward County is outstanding. And this is a grassroots organization that provides support and education to families and individuals with mental illness. In addition, the 12-step community in Broward County is unbelievable. We have close to 1,000 12-step meetings for alcoholics every week in Broward County. So there's no reason that a person can't get to a meeting. And the people that run Intergroup are some of the most giving people in the world. The Mental Health Association is doing a valiant effort at stopping a tsunami, and they are dedicated professionals and lay people, again, working to get the word out, getting to empower the lay community to do a better job at helping the person in need. Our community partners at Henderson Mental Health, every year they are asked to deliver more services to more people in need with less funding. So wherever we can, we need to advocate with our legislators to stop cutting the funding for mental health care in the state of Florida. As noted, the Alzheimer's Association is a phenomenal organization that is doing grassroots in the trenches work to get the word out about extent and impact of Alzheimer's and other cognitive disorders within our community. So wherever we can, we need to give them our support with our prayers, our financial resources, and our person power. But in a world where you can be anything, be kind. Doesn't cost you a dime, and it just makes a whole world of difference.
So were you, in the beginning of your career, were you involved in the transition in mental health where the schizophrenics were released from the mental institutions?
Actually, that occurred pre my entering the healthcare arena. When I arrived on the scene, we were dealing with the fallout from that because deinstitutionalization, which kind of took place in the 70s, everybody was released in the community to community treatment centers. And when they were failing, the people were ending back up in acute care. So all these people who for years had been maintained in the state hospital system, and they were suddenly thrown into the community and trying to adapt. Can you imagine being put in the state hospital in 1945 and now coming out in 1970 or 72? The world had completely changed. So number one, they can't even fathom the changes that have occurred in things like shopping and bill paying, and now there's malls and it wasn't downtown America. So just that alone was enough to derail them. And as well-intentioned as the deinstitutionalization was, there was not enough infrastructure. So these people fell through the cracks, and when they exacerbated and then became acutely psychotic, they ended up coming into the acute care setting where we had to piece them together again. So a lot of my career was spent piecing people back together and putting them into the community and the revolving door. Every new class that comes in, the first assignment is you need to watch Cuckoo's Nest and write me a paper of what you thought. I don't want a synopsis of the movie. I want you to tell me how these characters made you feel. I want to touch their feelings.
Phenomenal movie.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And our Sunrise Rotary YouTube channel has many reflections and talks about mental health issues, including my personal story of why I became involved in dementia awareness, based on my experience as a condo treasurer who stopped the foreclosure of someone who had advanced dementia. We also reviewed many articles on how police departments have sponsored CIT training for the police on mental health issues, and a review of videos and materials on the Miami Police Department website, which is a leader in this endeavor. And we reflect on travelers to unimaginable lands, a collection of case studies on how dementia affects both caretakers and their loved ones who have dementia. And we also reflect on two excellent guides, Listening to Speak Alzheimer's in particular, and the Dementia Caretaker's Guide. Rita Hayworth's daughter was one of the original celebrity fundraisers and a long-standing member of the Alzheimer's Association. Rita Hayworth's story, and also the story how Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga sponsored a last duet concert when he had advanced Alzheimer's, are both touching tales. And Glenn Campbell's widow has an excellent biography covering from before he was diagnosed through his struggles with various stages of the disease and finally leading to his death. And we show how the Alzheimer's 10 warning signs correspond with his life experiences. And this is one of the best case studies of somebody with Alzheimer's. Although this is not a book about dementia, Oliver Sacks' case studies, including The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, is the classic and often cited collection of case studies of patients suffering from both puzzling and fascinating neurological conditions, some of which may be dementia. And also the curious story of Phineas Gage, the most famous schmuck in history. And Parkinson's disease is also a neurological disease, but one that affects the motor functions, although secondarily it can attack cognition as well, and is similar to Lewy body dementia. And of course, Michael J. Fox is the most famous sufferer of Parkinson's. Now, among the speakers we've had to our Rotary chapter, I'd say the most important is Bob Anthony, who speaks on a program sponsored by the Boston's Children's Hospital to better serve pediatric patients who are suffering from mental health issues such as ADHD, addiction, bullying, etc. And the Sunrise Police Department works with Rotary in educating the public about mental health issues. We recently invited Chief Ransone to speak before our chapter on how police address mental health issues. And we previously invited Tamara Dawes, who works in the community outreach programs of the Sunrise Police Department, to speak on both homelessness and sex trafficking, and her associate Nadine spoke of her traumatic personal experience with trafficking and how difficult it can be to leave that very damaging life. And this is but a sampling of our speakers. If you are in Sunrise, Florida, please visit our club. You can find the meeting times on our club website. I have a video on the history of Rotary and my personal goals in joining Rotary. What is Rotary? We have a short video that we downloaded from the Rotary International website that explains the many goals of Rotary International.